Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. The topic of today's show is Agenda 21, and our very special guest is expert Tom DeWeese from the American Policy Center. Tom will explain what Agenda 21 is, its nefarious objectives, and how to stop it. Tom is one of the nation's leading advocates of individual liberty, free enterprise, private property rights, personal privacy, back-to-basics education, and American sovereignty and independence. Tom is a native of Ohio, and he's been a candidate for the Ohio Legislature, served as editor of 2 newspapers, and has owned several businesses since the age of 23. In 1989, Tom led the only privately funded election observation team to the Panamanian elections. In 2006, Tom was invited to Cambridge University to debate the issue of the United Nations before the Cambridge Union, a 200-year-old debating society. Today, he serves as founder and president of the American Policy Center and editor of the DeWeese Report. For 40 years, Tom has been a businessman, grassroots activist, writer, and publisher. He has always advocated a firm belief in man's need to keep moving forward while protecting our constitutionally guaranteed rights. My first question to Tom was to ask him how he became involved in his fight against Agenda 21. And here is what he had to say.
I have been an advocate of private property rights for many, many, many years. And back in the 1980s, really, we were starting to look at the environmental movement and becoming very concerned about what they were doing that was really affecting private property rights. And so we started to look at that, the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, organizations like that were having a huge impact on Congress. And at that time, there was not a discouraging word being said about the environmental movement. It was the most popular movement in the country. Nobody said a single thing about it. And we started to hold a series of conferences for Capitol Hill staffers up on Capitol Hill about some of these policies and what they meant. And that was really the first time anybody heard anything like that there. And then we started a publication called EPA Watch, and we had congressmen calling us saying, "Thank you, finally I've got something to answer these guys with." And nobody knew anything, what was going on with it. It was just accepted. And that was really the beginning of it. And so we were in the thick of it until 1992, when the Earth Summit came along, and Agenda 21, all the programs they had been working on behind the scenes through the all kinds of various UN conferences, the Habitat conferences, things like that, all came together into Agenda 21. And, then the race was on. Yeah. So it was all culminated right there.
Now, Bill Clinton, he established an executive order.
Yeah, he put together an executive order that created the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And the opposition, or the people who are promoting Agenda 21 and sustainable development, continue to tell us that Agenda 21 is just an innocuous 20-year-old document, that's their words, that means nothing. They worked really hard to put this together, but now it means nothing. And that it has no enforcement capability. It's just a suggestion. Well, that suggestion became, through that executive order, through the President's Council on Sustainable Development, that's when it became reality. It's what really started the process to take those suggestions and make them U.S. policy. And people who were serving on the President's Council were some of the same NGO groups that helped write it at the UN level. The Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club, groups like that were serving on that council, and their purpose was to make Agenda 21 policies U.S. policy. And one of the things that these guys did was they went into literally every agency of the federal government, particularly HUD, HEW, the EPA, and they got each of these agencies to create grant programs with very severe strings attached. What were the strings? The strings were Agenda 21. They were restrictions on energy use, on water use, on development, various other things. Creating alternative energies, creating alternative transportation, all that kind of thing were in these various grant programs. And yeah, they were voluntary. But what the thing is that once a community took the voluntary money, then they had to adhere to those strings, and that's the Kool-Aid. That's how this began to get infiltrated into the local communities. The second thing that they did, these same NGOs that wrote it on the international level, then got the President's Council on Sustainable Development to take its actions and get these grant programs. Then the same non-governmental organizations went into state legislatures, and they got the state legislatures to pass regulations telling every community that they had to do a comprehensive development plan. Now you have these local communities saying, what is a comprehensive development plan? The same NGO groups from the international level to the federal level to the state level now arrive in the local community and said, don't worry about it. We've got it all right here for you. And we've got the money for it too. Bing, 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 bing. And that's how it happened.
Yeah, the American Planning Association. About 2 years ago, we had a meeting down here, and at the time, with their president, Mitch Silver, and it was a very, very slick presentation, and most of the folks in the room really didn't have a clue about what he was talking about because it all sounded real nice,
Oh, yes, yeah.
So the pitch was very polished, and I was the only one at the end of the meeting to ask him to come forth and tell the audience that he's an NGO, and he is supporting a UN agenda, and I even had the documents in my hand where his APA was listed as an NGO. I think it was special consulting status at the time. I'm not sure what it is today. Maybe it's the same. He adamantly denied having any association whatsoever with the UN.
Yeah, I love that one. Yes, they have an entire section on their website that says that. And interestingly enough, we've got a copy of a newsletter from 1994 that was American Planning Association newsletter it was to their San Francisco or Northern California members, and it had an article in it entitled "How Sustainable is Our Planning?" Now, again, this is 2 years after Agenda 21 was introduced. And there's a paragraph in there that says this: Vice President Gore's book, Earth in the Balance, addressed many of the general issues of sustainability. Within the past year, the President's Council on Sustainable Development has been organized to develop recommendations for incorporating sustainability into the federal government. Also, various groups have been formed to implement Agenda 21, a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable development that was first adopted at the recent conference in Rio de Janeiro. Now, in that one paragraph, that document brings together the American Planning Association, Agenda 21, the UN's Earth Summit, Al Gore, Sustainable Development, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, and NGO groups with the mission of implementing Agenda 21, and the description of Agenda 21 as a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable planning. So
unbelievable.
That's their document.
Now, Tom, some of the audience are going to, they're listening, and they won't understand what exactly Agenda 21's objectives are. In other words, what is sustainable, what's not sustainable? Could you give us a little background on why this is an imperative?
If you look at the logo that they use for Agenda 21 in almost every publication they do, or at least they used to, you see three connecting circles. And these three circles are labeled economic prosperity, social equity, ecological integrity. We call those the 3 E's. That's the ruling principle of sustainable development. Agenda 21 is divided into 3 parts: economic, equity, and environment. Those 3 things encompass everything in your life. They keep selling this as just a way for conservation of resources and some sensible development. That's all. That's all it's about. The truth of the matter is that it encompasses every aspect of your life, particularly the social equity aspect of this. What is social equity? We're hearing the term now more and more, and we're hearing social justice. And we see this in documents. We see it in newspaper articles. We see it on newscasts. Social justice. What is that? Social justice is redistribution of wealth. That's what it's about. Another way to put it is from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Karl Marx was the first to coin the phrase social justice. I don't need to say much more about that, but essentially what we're seeing, not just as you individually as a redistribution of wealth, but take a look at America today. We have in the Midwest what's called a Rust Belt in Akron and Youngstown and Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Factories shut down. We hear it all over the country now. Jobs leaving America and going somewhere else. They're going to China and India and Brazil and other nations like that. Now, if this is about environmental problems, that we're trying to protect the environment, pollution that comes from the United States, comes from Brazil or India or China, is the same pollution that affect the earth. What you find in UN documents, those countries are exempt from a lot of these very severe restrictions. And why did those companies go to those countries? Because we had severe environmental restrictions. They're not allowed to produce in this country. Oh, that's protect the environment. But yet they go to these other countries, and it's okay. That literally is a redistribution of American wealth around the world, and that is a major part of the social justice plank of Agenda 21. It is to harmonize this evil country, this developed country, this rich country, this powerful country, to harmonize us into the rest of the world. And that Agenda 21 means agenda for the 21st century, and it means a reorganization of human society. And those are some very stark examples of what they mean by that.
When I speak to people about this, I tell them they have to flatten this country because too much freedom, too much wealth, too many guns, and they have to squash it, and they have to, in their minds, level the playing field in order to implement their agenda.
Well, if you look at it from their point of view, let's just say it is what it is. I already said Karl Marx is the one who came up with it. This is communism. And you had, when the Soviet Union fell, back in the 80s, 90s, then you had only one superpower left in the world. That was the United States. This was a nation that was built on the idea of limited government, on free enterprise, on private property, on individual liberty. That didn't fit the mold of the rest of the world. How do we get the United States to fit with the rest of the world? Well, we have all these liberties that we keep talking about. And they came up with a scheme. This came from the Club of Rome. They came up with a scheme of environmental Armageddon. That hey, you're welcome to have all the liberties you think you have, but if you don't have a planet to stand on anymore, then what good are they going to do you?
Right.
And that's when Americans began to say, well, gee, golly, that's a strong argument. We really need to rethink this. And we started throwing our liberties on the bonfire like a good old-fashioned book burning.
Yeah. Yep. I wrote down some examples of what's not sustainable, and you let me know if these are accurate. It was from the UN's Biodiversity Assessment Report. Ski runs, grazing of livestock, plowing of soil, building fences, industry, single-family homes, paved and tarred roads, logging activities, dams and reservoirs, power line construction, and economic systems that fail to set proper value on the environment.
Yeah, so right out of the Biodiversity Treaty, yeah.
Okay, so it's still a good list.
Yes.
Yeah. So, that's interesting because, when we talk about this and we talk about Agenda 21, people just cannot seem to get their heads wrapped around it. But, I find that when I put it into some very black and white terms, ski runs and grazing of livestock.
And of course, an economic system that is not sustainable is capitalism. And what are we hearing everywhere now? We're seeing it in our school systems. We're seeing it, of course, the UN is very blatant about it. And we're seeing demonstrations in the street. Kill capitalism, kill capitalism. This is what's killing the world. They came up with this idea that the United States and some other industrialized nations are responsible for global warming. And we have made the rest of the world suffer. And, and they blame capitalism for it. Of course, not a single one of those statements is true. The whole evidence on global warming is coming out very stark, very strong that there is no man-made global warming that is causing these problems. Of course, they had to change it to climate change in order to fit any of their schemes on this. But so that's a lie. But what they keep pushing for is in these UN meetings is a huge penalty on industrialized nations to pay a massive amount of money into a fund that's supposed to go to nations that are suffering under our oppression from global warming. And again, that's redistribution of wealth.
And I read an article recently where the banks are chiming in now, tying in the Agenda 21, sustainability, as you just mentioned, with the climate, to force a situation where people live in urbanized areas, consolidated areas of inhabitation, and I forgot what they call it exactly, but it's to get people out of the rural areas. Is that not true?
Yeah, this is there are two parts to the sustainable development policy being implemented. One is for the cities, one is for the rural areas. In the cities, it's called smart growth, and that's where they put a line around the city, basically, and say no development will take place outside of this, that urban sprawl, that horrible, evil thing, which, by the way, are people's homes, and so they lock you into these mega cities, and then the other part of it is the Wildlands Project, which really was created by Dave Foreman of the Earth First, which is one of the not so much active today, but they were back in the 90s. So forth. They were one of the most radical environmental green groups. They did a thing called monkey wrenching, where they'd go in and destroy the equipment from the timber companies and things like that. They're very avant-garde. They like to wear the little berets and show how cool they were and all that. And but they the Wildlands Project called for the rewilding of 50% of all the land in every state in the United States back to the way it was before Christopher Columbus stepped foot here. And that crazy idea ends up in the UN's Biodiversity Treaty, and herding people out of the rural areas into the cities is the goal. And you say, well, how do you do that? Well, you do it by making it impossible to live there. And what are we seeing happen today? We have the governor of Maryland is pushing a plan to lock away 400,000 acres in the state of Maryland. And one of the parts of that scheme is to ban the use of septic tanks in rural areas, of course, as an excuse to protect the Chesapeake Bay, even though there's no evidence whatsoever that septic tanks cause any problem at all. You ban septic tanks, you make it impossible to live in those rural areas. And they go back to the outhouses, I guess. But that's one way. And the wetlands plans that they have, now the EPA is moving to where an occasional mud puddle that happens during the rainy season during the year in a place where there's never any water otherwise suddenly becomes a navigatable waterway, and the EPA controls that. The EPA is moving on controlling water in all over the western states. Now in the eastern states, you control the water, you control the land. And you saw the standoff at the Bundy Ranch in Nevada.
I was just going to ask about that. Yep.
No, this is not Bundy. Cliven Bundy is the last of 100 ranchers that were there. They make up this excuse. First of all, the excuse was that he wasn't paying his BLM fees. The second excuse was that we're protecting a desert tortoise. Neither is true. Cliven Bundy has stood up to, and he said, we tried to deal with the BLM. You can't deal with the BLM. Once you've agreed to this, they come for more. They want the land. That's what it's about. And herding people off of those rangelands, talk about the grazing of cattle and so forth, and mentioned the Biodiversity Treaty. This is it. They hate cattle. They keep saying that cattle are a major cause of global warming because of cow flagellants. You know what?
Yeah.
You know where really the greatest source of that kind of a thing comes from? Termites. They are 1/4 of that source. And guess what? The Forest Service now has in a sustainable plan for the forest, meaning trees fall, you don't do anything about it. That's natural. You let the tree fall on the ground and rot. You know what that causes? More termites. So,
well, you go back to the Bundy Ranch as an example in the BLM. What the whole world saw was the use of force, also how they were armed in order to do that. Right? So it's not just about increased laws, regulations, and codes, but it is quote-unquote enforcement. And, these guys were armed to the teeth.
Yeah, it shows you how far they're willing to go. A second example of that was rancher Wayne Hage back in the 80s and the 90s. In fact, his battle goes clear back into the 70s. In Nevada, same deal. He stood up to the BLM, who was trying to take his ranch, and his two of his daughters are friends of mine, and he was as well. He's passed away now, but they literally came one day. They used to intimidate them. They'd be driving along the road, and they'd get run off the road, things like that. But eventually, one day, a truckload of BLM agents, armed to the teeth, arrived on the ranch, and their daughter told me the purpose was they expected him to come out with his rifle and they were going to blow him away. Mm-hmm. Instead, he came out with a video camera, and she said, "You never saw people trying to hide their guns so fast." He had that video camera, and it saved his life because they literally were coming for him. And he's won in court 3 times, and yet they keep appealing, and he hasn't gotten anything out of it. But they were coming for his ranch. He's another example of this kind of situation.
I mentioned earlier that I had gone down about 2 years ago when Mitch Silver had come here and did his presentation. And how do you fight this thing? I was heads down trying to make the planning organization, the mayor, the city council aware. In fact, I got some of your brochures, a special report, Agenda 21. It's the white booklet. I ordered a bunch of them going back about 2 years ago, and I mailed them out to everybody with letters and so on. I didn't hear a peep out of them. When I tried to get a meeting with the mayor, wouldn't return the phone call. When the APA was down doing their presentation about 2 years ago, the mayor and the members of the city council and the planning department were just slobbering all over this guy and just praising him for everything he's done and so on and so forth. In fact, today, I believe he has a new job. He's the Parks Commissioner for New York City. New York, of course, is the poster child for globalization. And so what I ran up against is trying to get people to pay attention. They think you're a tinfoil hat wearer. They think you're a conspiracy theorist. I've even went as far as to write my state legislatures. I mailed them a copy of the books also. They wrote me back at least, said, "Thank you, Mike, for the books." But they're not doing anything about it. They just keep marching forward. So I'd be interested to, and I'm sure the audience would too, to understand, are there better tactics, better approaches in order to get these guys to pay attention?
This is a very long answer, so bear with me.
Okay, no problem.
This is what we're dealing with. They have spent a massive amount of money and time to try to discredit our movement. I will tell you now, they are terrified of what we are accomplishing because, just from the end of March through the end of June, we suffered through about 7 different attacks against us, mainly led by the American Planning Association and particularly the Southern Poverty Law Center, trying to paint us as tinfoil hat wearers, as you said, just a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists. And the message in these reports has been, stop listening to those idiots out there and those protesting. It's just wasting our time. Just do it. Just put this thing in place. Doesn't matter what they have to say. But the truth of the matter is they spend all that attention on us because they know we've got them. We are starting to get people to listen, and one of the things I noticed as I researched this, and of course they keep denying that this has anything to do with their policies. Their policies are all local. It's interesting to note that as I read that quote from that 1994 American Planning Association newsletter, it's a very strong example. Up until about 2005, they were very proud of it. They were. I mean, here you had an event the UN Earth Summit in 1992. They had 50,000 delegates there. These were leaders of countries. They had 179 heads of state. They had bureaucrats and policymakers, and of course the NGOs and all of that there. And I've got video of Nancy Pelosi introducing this into Congress. It's a C-SPAN video. It's on my website, and we've got document after document. We've got a 1998 Federal Register report on the EPA's Challenge Grant Program. It says right in that report, this is also part of implementing Agenda 21. So up until about 2005, 2006, everything they had said Agenda 21. We started to make this a national issue, and suddenly it was like the BLM soldiers at the Wayne Hage Ranch. They started hiding everything behind them and saying, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Never heard of that. This is all local." And that's what we're up against today. And the trouble is, we've got the documents. In trouble for them.
Right.
But so, yeah, what you have to picture. And this is where it becomes difficult. You have let's say, for example, your county commissioners, could be your city councilman, and you view that as your government. And you go to them, and you get those 3 minutes to go and speak to them. On high, they grant you 3 whole minutes to address whatever they're doing to you. And you go in and you start talking about, you're implementing UN Agenda 21. What you don't see standing behind them in the dark, in the back rooms, are hundreds, if not thousands, of non-governmental organizations. They call themselves stakeholders. They come in and proclaim themselves. You'll see this in documents now. We're talking with the people of the community and the stakeholders. And
Yep.
The fact of the matter is, these guys are carpetbaggers. They don't live there. You're the stakeholders. You're the ones who live there. But they're standing behind them, and you come up and you start saying these things, and they're whispering in their ear. The guy's nuts. Don't pay any attention to him. Now, why do they believe that? I'll tell you why. Because when you elect your city councilmen, your county commissioners, your state representatives, your mayors, your congressmen, your governors, what you're doing, automatically they go to these national meetings. There's a national meeting in the National Association of course you've got the Governors Association. You've got a whole slew of organizations for every one of these elected officials. They go there. They might be good guys who just ran for office because they want to help the community. But they go there, and who do they hear from the podium? What are the policies they're hearing? They're hearing these same NGOs. They're standing there telling them the same stuff. They even give them sample legislation. Go home. They go home, and they're met by the same organizations, the same NGOs, and they're saying, "Hey, you got the stuff? Good. Hey, we got the grant money. We got this. We got that. We're all ready to go." These guys begin to believe this is a proper role of government. Nobody's mentioned Agenda 21 to them. They never use that term. So you come in and you start talking about it, and they just shut their head because these guys are behind them saying, the guy's nuts. Don't pay attention to him. And now you get the automatic roll of the eyes, the sigh, "Oh, we aren't going to play that game. Get out of here."
Right.
And because they're surrounded by these guys. So what we're advocating that people do, and there's no silver bullet here. There are other ways to many ways to deal with things, but one of the things we're telling people is to focus on property rights, because first of all, you cannot implement sustainable development policies without damaging in some way, if not eliminating, property rights. And so we had one of the things you have to do before you start a fight. You need to do some research. You need to find out. First of all, there are policies that are being implemented here, that are being proposed, that you're opposed to. What are they and why? Why are you opposed to them? And begin to logically put out your plans. Who are the victims of this? Who's it going to affect? It might be the whole community. It might be just a little neighborhood somewhere. They've got a plan to do something. Find that out. And that's when you can begin to recruit other people to your side. Don't talk about Agenda 21. Talk about the policy, and again, look at why is it that it's bothering you. But the other thing is define your terms. If you just go in and say, "I want to protect my private property rights. I believe in private property rights," today that is becoming a very confused issue. because we've had so much invasion of property. And, what does it mean? What do you mean by property rights? One of the things that we've come up with, I found a definition that comes from a Supreme Court justice in the state of Washington. It was written in 1997. His name is Richard B. Sanders. And he did this because the Supreme Court there, like all of them now, are handling so many private property issues. And they didn't have a good definition of what they meant by that. So he sat down to write a definition. And I've searched, and it's the best I've found. And this is what it is, and it's vitally important. It says, quote, property in a thing consists not merely in its ownership and possession, but in the unrestricted right of use, enjoyment, and disposal. Anything which destroys any of the elements of property to that extent destroys the property itself. The substantial value of property lies in its use. If the right of use be denied, the value of the property is annihilated and ownership is rendered a barren right.
Okay.
The key to that is use, because I guarantee that your elected officials will tell you, of course, they protect private property rights. Do you know what most people think of their private property rights are today? They get to pay the mortgage and the taxes, and then somebody else tells them everything else to do on their property.
Right.
And so this is vital. So what we've done, you can find it on my website. We've created a document that is a all right, what's the name of it?
That's okay.
Just went blank. The Resolution to Protect Citizens' Property Rights. And all this document says is that if they're going to do something that affects your property, they'll bring you into the discussion. If they go ahead and do what they were discussing, then they're going to reimburse you. They're going to pay you for whatever loss you have. And the third thing is, they can't just bring all these little stakeholders, these self-proclaimed stakeholders and planners onto your property willy-nilly without your written permission. That's all it says. And the way you use it is this way. Instead of, when you get those 3 minutes, and by the way, what I'm going to say here is, do not try this alone. That is a sure path to defeat if you go in by yourself. You need to organize, you need to have your plans in a row, and you need to have people there with you when you go in to do this. And I'll explain why that's important in a second. But when you get that 3 minutes, you walk up to the podium and you say, ladies, gentlemen, to the council, as you're bringing these plans and these planners into our community, I've just got one question for you. What guarantees do I have that you'll protect my private property and my rights to it? And I guarantee you, as I said before, they will stand up, of course we will. Of course, hey, I'm a property owner too. Of course we will. And you just smile at them and say, I'm really happy to hear you say that. But ladies, gentlemen, I'd like to have it in writing, please. Right. And you put this resolution in front of them. And now watch their faces. If you can, start to read it aloud. Now, what has happened in some cases, as people have done this, is that they'll say, we need to take that under advisement. Fine, I have a copy for each of you. Here it is. Next meeting, you go back and you say, gentlemen, ladies, I gave you a document. I asked you a question. What's your answer? I guarantee you they will not sign that document because their consultation was with those NGOs telling them, you can't do this. No, absolutely not. The guy's nuts. It's crazy. I had a county commissioner in Southern Virginia tell one of my people who introduced this that they weren't going to sign it. And she said, why? He said, I'm not going to get in a debate with you about it. He said, I don't want to debate you. Why won't you sign it? Eventually he said, I think there's a bigger agenda afoot here. She said, like what? I'm not going to debate it with you. And I told people later, what do you do with a guy like this? Well, you run a campaign against him and you say, he's got some kind of wacky conspiracy theory against protecting private property rights.
There you go.
You
Turn
just
the tables.
flipped it on him.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the point here. When they refuse to sign this document, you ask the most radical question in the English language. Why? And then, see whatever their answer is. But this is where you need to have other people involved. You need to have them lined up in a queue. Why won't you sign that document? Why won't you sign that document? You need to make noise. You need to start ratcheting it up at the next meeting. You need to have people out in front with signs with these guys' pictures on it, and with the question, why? Why won't you protect my property rights? Get letters to the editor. Get it coordinated. Take a petition down around the community asking people, do you approve of this? Do you know what they're doing? Here's what we only ask them this. Does it concern you that they won't protect your private property rights? On and on and on. What you're doing here is you're laying the groundwork to run a campaign to run these guys out of office. That's what it's about. That's what you have to do. They have had 20-plus years to entrench with this. They have the money, they have the political power, and they have those NGOs behind them. And let me tell you a secret. Every one of those NGO groups is a 501c3 private organization. I don't care if it's the National Governors Association or the National Conference of Mayors. They are private organizations with no power unless your elected officials give it to them. And you need to start over again and get new people who won't, and watch them dry up and blow away. They won't go easily. They'll file lawsuits. They'll do everything in their power. But if you can get the right people in power and give them support behind them, then you can turn things around and change it. That's the long answer.
Tom, how many, in your experience, how many of these county commissioners are flat out oblivious, or they are in the know? What's your sense for that?
I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, it was almost 100%. But today, that is changing rapidly. I don't have a percentage to know, but I know this. For the first time, it started about 2010. For the first time, I started receiving phone calls from elected representatives saying, what is this? What can I do? I've received calls from state legislators who have asked me to look at their legislation. They wanted to put something in. I've had township supervisors. I've had other, county commissioners and so forth call me. And what they'll do is they'll call and say, what do I do? And I'll tell them some things. And they'll call me 3 or 4 days later and say, okay, I did that. Now what do I do?
Okay.
This is revolutionary. This is the beginning. It's a step. It's a minor step, but it's also a major one. And that's what's vitally important. We've never had that before, and this has got them terrified. I will tell you that. I know it does. The head of ICLEI, the gentleman you mentioned earlier, ICLEI USA, told an associate of mine, not knowing who he was, that they are terrified of what we've accomplished because we have gotten over 150 communities to drop out of ICLEI and to begin to throw these plans out.
I was just going to ask you that. I was going to ask you about specific victories that you guys have scored.
It started really in 2010 with the election of 5 county commissioners in Carroll County, Maryland, particularly Richard Rothschild. I'm very pleased to know this now. I didn't know it then, but he had my materials, and he became very concerned about this, and he put a team of people to run for county commissioner in Maryland, the People's Republic of Maryland, against sustainable development policies, and they got elected. They took over the board, and the very first thing they did was throw out ICLEI. They were the first community in the country. ICLEI is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. It is one of the main NGO groups that helped write Agenda 21, and they made it their mission worldwide to implement Agenda 21 sustainable development policies in every community in the country, in the world. And they had 600 plus cities in America that were paying them dues to come in with all kinds of software and conferences and newsletters and programs and policies to put all this stuff in place. They would indoctrinate the city government or the county government to only think in terms of sustainable policies, and that's where these things would come together. They threw them out. Then they fired the sustainability manager that was hired by the first administration. I think they abolished the whole job. Then they met with the Planning Commission for the first time. I saw the video of this in Richard's office one day, and they're sitting there going on and on about some project that they're going to do where they're going to build all this new stuff in there, and Richard looks at him and says, what about the property rights there? And they looked at him pretty much like, what property rights? He said, the people live there. They have homes there. We have a contract with these people to protect their homes. So a little while later, they go on in the conversation, and they come up with something else, and Richard says, well, how does that adhere to the Constitution? And it was almost like, what Constitution? So they sent the plan back to the planning department saying, don't bring this up again to us until it protects private property rights and it adheres to the Constitution of the United States. That was a revolutionary day. So that was the beginning of it. Then we started to get communities all over the country: Amador County, California; Montgomery County, Pennsylvania; Edmond, Oklahoma; Las Cruces, New Mexico; Spartanburg, South Carolina; several counties in Virginia; Carver County in Massachusetts; Pinellas County in Florida; more in Texas, more around. We had, now, as I said, over 150 cities that we know of have now left ICLEI. And what's important to know here, though, is that just because you're not an ICLEI city or you've thrown them out does not mean these policies are not being imposed. And what has to happen in every one of these counties to make it important, to make it effective, is not only do they kick ICLEI out, but they also begin to turn back the policies that they help put in place. The first thing to do is to junk the comprehensive development plan. One of the places I'm most excited about, and we're going to have them on our next webinar, in Rindge, New Hampshire, a little tiny town up in upstate New Hampshire. They got wind that the county government or the city government was doing something, and it turned out to be sustainable development policies. And not knowing anything about it, these local people, just residents, started to compare notes, started to research, and they came together, and they literally threw out the sustainable development policies in their community. And one of the best things that they did was they made it so in their community they cannot take any new HUD grants or other agency grants without a vote of the people.
Wow.
That is huge. And that's a little tiny town, and they've eliminated it from their town, and they got a new city council. And we've had, I think it's about 7 or 8 states that have introduced legislation against Agenda 21 policies and protection of private property rights. One of the problems I have with the legislation that has passed so far is that they do not have a definition of property rights. And so they just say they're going to protect property rights. What does that mean? Now, we attempted to do it in Oklahoma. I met with some activists there. But the trouble, what they did in Oklahoma was they took my definition that I read earlier, and they, I gave it to them to use. All they used was this line: property in a thing consists not merely in its ownership and possession, but in the unrestricted right of use, enjoyment, and disposal. Unrestricted use. That was all they used. And we got it through the House. We got it through the Senate committee. Then the other side found out about it, and they picked up on that unrestricted use clause, and they went to cities all over the state of Oklahoma, and they said they're going to stop you from being able to zone and to have any kind of control at all. They're going to take away your job. And all these cities rose up against the bill. They didn't use the rest of it, the whole point about the right of use. And so I'm working with them now to try to regroup and start over again and do it right. But you got to be careful. You've got to define your terms. But we've now achieved several counties, particularly in Ohio, resolutions to stop local communities from joining regional governments, which is a major thing. So these are the kind of things that are starting to come together. These are baby steps, but people who just get into this issue and see how huge it is, how vast it is, get intimidated because it is huge, and they think there's no hope. We've lost the republic. Yet I have been in this from the beginning, and I went through all those wilderness years where no one was listening, and now I see all this happening, and I have never been more thrilled, more energized, and I keep telling them, look, this is D-Day. We are on Utah Beach. We've got a beachhead. Now we move inland. You have to look at it that way. You will lose any fight you don't engage. That's for sure. And you cannot let them have, just give them a victory because, it's too big, we can't stop them. Yeah, we can. They're terrified of our little ragtag band. They're making up all kinds of lies about we're funded by Exxon and the Koch brothers. Totally untrue. Yeah. And they make all this up. But that's because they're scared, because they know everything they have done is built on a house of lies, and all we have to do is begin to expose that, and eventually, and what we see happening now, is it begins to fall.
Well, that's because they know that a knowledgeable minority can turn their whole world upside down.
Absolutely.
People who really engage and become activists. So let me ask you a question, Tom. You mentioned these victories. How about Alabama? Because there was a lot made about Alabama passing its Allin Law to protect private property rights against Agenda 21. Is that a good law, or in your view, does it have holes in it?
Well, the holes in it are what I described. It doesn't define property rights, and it doesn't define what Agenda 21 is. One of the good things it does is it focuses on ICLEI membership, and it focuses on grants. And so those are strong things, but it could be strengthened. And again, it was a first shot, and it was huge. And so that's a good thing. And it really shook the other side up, I'll tell you that. But we can do better. And one of the things I'm working on is I'm trying to get together with a lot of these elected representatives in various levels of government to come up with the right language, the powerful language that will really do it. Let them tell me what as well as I can tell them what that needs to be. And once we've got that, then we can spread that around the country, and we can start pockets of resistance that way. We can train activists how to support that legislation when it gets introduced, because that's the other thing that happens. We ask an elected representative who's on our side, who wants to do the right thing, and we ask them to stick their neck out there and against all this opposition, and we just let them do it, and they get it chopped off. They're going to do that once, if at all. You got to be there for them and help them out. You can't just send them out. Okay, you go out there and do it now. You can't do that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But now, Tom, also you have these, you mentioned it earlier, you have your webinars, and I would love for the audience to know about that, because I see your emails come in, and I've watched some of the webinars, and they are extremely informative. So can you help the audience understand what they're about and how to get to them?
Absolutely. I really started these as much as a response to all the attacks against this. Like, okay, watch this. In fact, the first webinar we did, I completely addressed the issue of the conspiracy theory that they throw on us, and showed, as I'm talking today, a lot of these documents and showing that it's not a conspiracy theory. It is most definitely a part there they're trying to hide. So that was the first one we did. We started them in June. We just did the last one yesterday, the latest one. And it's building blocks, step by step. We've focused on who these NGO, these non-governmental organizations are, who funds them, where they come from, what their mindset is, how they operate. And so we focused on that. Now, as of yesterday, we've really started the effort to teach the folks how to fight back. A lot of things we're talking about today, going into detail. I have got some of the best people in the country who are joining me on these things, people who have been on the front lines and creating legislation, creating organizations on the local level, things like that, talking about how they did it, and we're putting it all together, and we're going to keep going. I have no limit on how many we're going to do. We're going to keep doing them until we've run out of things to talk about, or people quit listening. And everything is on our website. They're free. You can go to AmericanPolicy.org, and it says there's a little ticket up there at the top that says webinar, and all you have to do is just sign in there. The archives for the previous 4 are up there now, a lot of the documents we used as well, and so you can catch up that way. And then starting in October will be the next one. And in fact, I'm going to have the folks from Ringe, New Hampshire on in October. And I'm very excited about that. We're going to talk about how to deal with the planners. And we're just giving you all the details we can. You get a chance to ask questions. And I'm trying to create an educated, well-trained, ready Army with all the tools they need to go into the combat of city council and county commissioners and state legislatures and know what to do. And one of the prime examples I'm using, in the state of Virginia, the property rights movement here is outstanding. The things that they are accomplishing, they're sticking together, they take their defeats and they come back. And this is what people have to know, because one of the things that people miss in all this is our people like to go out and wave a sign or make a phone call or attend a meeting and say, well, I did all that, didn't make any difference. Of course it didn't make any difference. These guys know that's what you're going to do. You're going to go home, you're going to quit. And then they're going to go right on doing what they're doing. And you're going to sit there grumbling about how it didn't matter. Well, you got to get engaged and stay engaged, and it will matter, and we're showing that in places around the country. And with the webinars, I'm sharing all that information and giving you what you need to make it happen.
You know, it's you have some amazing information and research on your website. As I mentioned earlier, I had bought the book. I had bought actually many copies of it, Special Report Agenda 21 and How to Stop It. It's only 33 pages, and this is for the folks that are listening in. Very, very informative. And then you have, I think, a new book out, right? The Wrenching Transformation of America, Agenda 21?
What I did, we put together about 2 years ago what I call the atom bomb in this whole thing, the Stop Agenda 21 Action Kit. And this thing, I mean, it's a kit. It's got 4 manuals in it. It's got 2 DVD sets. It's got several other books and documents in it. And, it sells for $159, and it has helped a lot of people to do, catch up with it. It's kind of like a college course. But a lot of people can't afford that. So I took the highlights out of that, and I compiled them all into one manual, which is what you're talking about,
okay.
For much less. And so that's what that's about. It's got the highlights in it, so that people have that. It's got more than the little booklet you bought. It's got less than the action kit, but it's got the highlight.
Yeah, it's just really the research and the material you have is amazing. And I'm so happy to have been able to get you on the show, Tom. It's a very, very important issue, and I just wish that more and more people would wake up to it.
I think it's important that people know that there are so many issues we're facing today, and the other side is so good at divide and conquer, and they want to keep you reaching and from one issue to the next to keep you going back and forth and back and forth. If you start to understand Agenda 21 and what it's about, that this affects every aspect of your life, you will begin to be able to connect the dots to see that these other issues we're dealing with, whether it's immigration or gun control or, of course, the thing that happened in the Bundy Ranch or things like that, they're all interconnected. There is, as I said in the book, it's a wrenching transformation of our society. That's a quote from Al Gore, by the way, and from his book Earth in the Balance. He said that. And that's exactly what we're going through. That's what people are feeling. They know something's wrong in America. They don't know what it is, but something's not right. You learn about Agenda 21, you'll figure it out pretty quick.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because a lot of people look at everything that's going on in the world and they view it as these are disparate issues. They're all disconnected. But it's really all connected. Well, Tom, I want to thank you again. And for folks, they want to go to your site, AmericanPolicy.org. And I would love to have you come back again to talk about it anytime you want to talk about it, because I think it's that important an issue.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All righty. All right, Tom. Well, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.
And that concludes my interview with Tom DeWeese, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. The American Policy Center website can be found at www.americanpolicy.org. I highly recommend everyone go there and peruse. The site is loaded with top-notch research and content to help you understand Agenda 21 and why it needs to be defeated. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, The Sage of Quay, which can be found at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.